Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Waffles RC. We are going to get back onto the Baja truck in just a little bit, but first, I have to fix this. So, if you stayed to the end of the last video, which if you haven't, go back and watch it. I did the definition of play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and I stripped the gears in this rear axle, the center rear axle of the semi, trying to tow a full-size Toyota Tacoma with a toy. It budged it, but I think it may be a little too heavy for this thing. But I stripped the gears. So what I want to show you guys, how do you replace the gears in an RC axle? Now each axle is going to be different. There's the portal axles, straight axles. They're all going to be different, and there's different parts you have to take apart to be able to get this stuff out. But the main theory of all of this is we have to get the axle shafts out so that we can get the carrier out to change the gear. As you see, I have replacement gear. And for when I try again, which I will, I brought another one. So let's get to disassembling this to change out the gear. So the main thing that you're going to want to do on any of these axles, whether it's straight, portal, whatever, plastic, metal, they're all basically the same, is you need to be able to get the axle shafts out. On this one, to do that, I have to get the fake brake calipers off, and use your own organization as you will. I like to keep all the bolts together with the parts that come off, so that way I don't lose them, because, well, I know me. And as you can tell by my very organized workbench and everything else, it's very easy to lose stuff in a clustered area. So if you don't want to make too big of a mess and lose all your parts, you can just pull the axle shaft out enough to get it out of the carrier. So that's all I'm doing, is just moving this out so I can pull this out, and hopefully this will all stay together. And there we are. We now have the carrier out. So it only has 4 bolts on top of here. Got to remove this bearing, take the 4 bolts out, put the new gear on, and we're good to go. Except when you're putting new gears in, because you stripped them, remember, you stripped these ones most likely as well. So you have to replace the pinion gear, because if this got chewed up, guaranteed this got chewed up. Now you can check it and make sure, but safe bet is to just replace it. With most kits that you can get just the ring gear separate from the pinion gear. I got pinion gear and ring gear. It's all in the same package. Since I did that, I'm going to replace both of them, just to be on the safe side. So once again, each axle is going to be different on how the pinion gear is held in here. This one has a C-clip on it, so I have to remove this little C-clip, and then this pinion gear should fall right out. Others just slide in there. So you just have to look and see if there's anything holding it on the outside of the axle, like a C-clip like this, or an E-clip, whatever you want to call them. Don't lose that, because you're going to need it. And just be very careful when you take it off. And there you are. Here is our old pinion gear. Now it doesn't look like it's in horrible condition, but we're going to replace it anyhow. Now your next step after getting everything out, most important step, clean out the diff housing. Because if you're like me and you stripped a gear, this grease that's left in there is now full of metal chunks from the gear that you stripped, whether it be the pinion gear or the carrier. So clean it out as thoroughly as you can, so that way you're starting absolutely fresh. And as you saw when I hammered the pinion gear out, you want to make sure before you do any reassembly, make sure that your bearings are still in there. And inspect them if it looks like they're all beat up too, because sometimes metal can get into those if they're not sealed. Sometimes those will be messed up as well. And I'm sure everybody's going to have their own personal preference on bearings. I've had the best luck with any time I've had to replace bearings. I've had the best luck with, when you go affordability wise, with the Fast Eddy bearing kits. They're a very good comprehensive bearing set. So if you get it for your axles or your RC, you can replace all of the bearings with that. So now that that's all good, we open up our new one, and they put it in as many bags as possible to make it impossible for you to get to it. Another good thing to do when you're replacing these gears. Now, if you're putting underdrive or overdrive gears, you have to replace, I guess, whichever ones you want to replace, because everybody does different things nowadays with gears. But if you're just trying to do a stock replacement, essentially, make sure you count when you order it. You want to make sure that you have the right number of teeth and the right pitch. So once you do get the new gears, before you take anything apart or try to put it all together, make sure that the number of teeth on your ring gear and on your pinion gear match the ones that you took out if you're doing stock replacement. Now, if you're putting overdrives in on the front or underdrive on the back or whatever, make sure your gears are as close, or make sure your gears are the ones that you ordered. For this one, being a 6-wheel drive semi, I want all the gears to be exactly the same. So I'm going to count the teeth on this and on this and match it with the old ones. Another thing to look out for while doing this, so this is the old pinion gear, and it had a provision for a C-clip. And thanks to the magics of Amazon, this is the new one. It does not have a provision for a C-clip. So this is just going to float in there, hopefully. That is a little annoying. You know what? I'm just going to let it float in there, and we'll hope everything works, and we'll see what happens. So now I'm going to replace the ring gear and then dry fit it in there and make sure that everything stays where it needs to stay. So this part is very specific to this specific type of axle, which I can't remember the name of it, but I'll put it right here of what type of axles these are. But these axles are an open differential. I did that on purpose for turning reasons with 6-wheel drive, and this isn't an off-road vehicle, except I've taken it off-road. But if you have these axles, there is an open differential which has all the spider gears right in here. I obviously did not do this, so I'm going to do it now and then do it to the other 2 axles. There is no grease in here, and that's my fault because I didn't take this apart when I first initially built this thing. So let's put some grease in here and then put it all back together. All right, now there is a bunch of different grease options out there in the magic world of the internet and RC stuff. I use just regular bearing grease for like my big cars, mainly because I'm cheap and I don't want to spend a lot of money on grease. So that's what I use, but there are a lot of good options out there, especially for carriers like this, open differentials. They have thicker stuff that makes it act somewhat like a locker. I don't want that in this truck, so that's why I just use this grease. The other vehicles that I have that are just locked up, I'm just cheap and I just use this grease. So now it's all just a matter of reassembly back to the way that it was, and then you can put it back in your RC. Pinion gear is already in there. Make sure you do that, because I've never done that where I've left the pinion gear out and put the whole axle back together. Okay, we have our axle shafts back in, carriers in, ring gears in. Everything seems to be where it should be, except for this whole C-clip. So I will try an idea with this whole C-clip thing missing. I'm going to try an idea, because this pinion gear does move in and out, which affects whether it spins or doesn't do anything at all because the gear mesh is wrong. Once again, all of this will be different depending on your axle that you're doing. Speaking of that, if you're doing metal axles, all the bolts that you took out, make sure to reapply your Loctite onto the bolts that you took out. You want to put Loctite on any bolt that goes into metal. And for those of you that are doing this on plastic axles, you don't need the Loctite onto plastic, but any bolt that goes into metal, put Loctite on it. Trust me, they will back out. No matter how tight you do it, they'll find a way to back out. Ask me how I know. So on these, I'm not putting the fake calipers back on because I could see that there was rubbing on it. So that's going to affect the drivability of this truck. So those will not be going back on. So now we have to put our diff cover back on. But before that, we got to load this thing up with some grease. Once again, there are a lot of different options out there for grease when it comes to RC stuff. And I'm sure there will be a lot of people saying a specific type of grease is good. And for the most part, you'd probably be right. But for me, I am cheap and I have regular waterproof wheel bearing grease for a car. And you can see I have a tub of it. This is what I'm going to use. All right, and that's it. We have changed the gears. It is no longer stripped. Everything is working. And as you see, obviously this is a very custom build, but as you see, I left the shocks, control arms, I left all that stuff on here. And I did that for a reason, so I wouldn't forget where they went, how they were adjusted, where everything is supposed to go. That is how you change your gears in one type of crawler axle. So like I said, it's all going to be different between which axles you have, which RC you have, everything like that. But I hope that gives you a basic idea of how to do some maintenance on these things. And I realized this was a lot more in depth than I thought it was. So I'm going to make this its own video. And so you guys will get an extra video this week. The normal video will still come out on Friday and it'll be on the Baja truck. So I'm going to put this back together and then everything will be good with this. And I'll try and pull the truck again later. So thank you all for watching.